My beloved child, do not move past this moment too quickly. Something has been pressing against the silence, waiting for the exact second when your heart would be quiet enough to hear it. You may have arrived here casually, perhaps expecting only a few comforting words, but there is a deeper reason this message feels different. Pause here. Let the noise around you fade for just a little while, because what you are about to hear carries the weight of a conversation your soulmate has been rehearsing privately, a conversation they never imagined they would need to have with you. And the first words in their heart are these: I never thought I'd have to tell you this, yet what follows is not what your fear may immediately assume. There is a truth beneath those words, and it has been growing in the hidden places where love, regret, hope, and courage meet. Your soulmate has been thinking about you more deeply than they have allowed anyone to see. There are moments when your name rises in their mind without warning, not because they are trying to remember you, but because some part of them has never truly stopped carrying you. It happens in ordinary places. In a quiet room. In the middle of a conversation with someone else. During a drive when the road stretches ahead and there is nothing to distract them from what they feel. Sometimes they hear a phrase that reminds them of something you once said. Sometimes they see a small detail that would mean nothing to anyone else, yet suddenly it opens a door inside them. And behind that door is you. For a long time, they believed they could keep that door closed. They told themselves they needed more time. They told themselves it was better not to complicate things. They told themselves that silence was safer than vulnerability and distance was easier than telling the truth. They believed that if they waited long enough, the feelings would become simpler. They thought time would turn intensity into indifference. But something unexpected happened. Instead of fading, the truth became clearer. That is why these words have become so heavy inside them. I never thought I'd have to tell you this. They are not saying it because they want to frighten you. They are saying it because the story they believed they were living has changed. Something they once felt certain about no longer feels certain. A decision they thought they had made has begun to unravel. A wall they built carefully has developed cracks. And through those cracks, the truth about you has started shining through. There is something important you must understand before the deeper revelation comes. Your soulmate has not only been thinking about what they feel for you. They have been thinking about who they became while trying not to feel it. That realization has been difficult. They remember moments when they acted distant even though they wanted closeness. They remember words they swallowed because pride told them not to speak. They remember times when they convinced themselves that you would understand their silence, even when they never explained what was happening inside them. They remember assuming that there would always be another opportunity, another conversation, another moment to say what mattered. But recently, something shifted. They began to realize that opportunities are not endless. People change. Hearts heal. Doors that remain open for too long can eventually close. A person who once waited may one day decide to walk forward. And when your soulmate allowed themselves to imagine a future in which you were no longer emotionally waiting in the same place, something inside them reacted more strongly than they expected. That reaction surprised them. It was not simple jealousy. It was not possession. It was not fear of losing control. It was recognition. They suddenly understood that your presence had become woven into their emotional world in ways they had never admitted. They had built small future moments around you without realizing it. They had imagined conversations with you that had never happened. They had wondered how you would react to news they had not yet shared. They had pictured seeing you after long periods of silence. They had imagined your expression when they finally explained themselves. And then they noticed something that unsettled them even more. In nearly every future that felt meaningful, somehow, you were there. That is when the words first formed. I never thought I'd have to tell you this. But they still did not say them. Instead, they became quieter. You may have mistaken that quietness for disinterest. You may have wondered whether the emotional thread between you had weakened. You may have questioned whether the connection meant as much to them as it once seemed to mean. But what you could not see was that their silence was becoming crowded. Crowded with memories. Crowded with questions. Crowded with the uncomfortable awareness that they had underestimated the impact you made on their life. There is something about you they once misunderstood. And this is where the story begins to turn. Your soulmate believed that your strength meant you did not need reassurance. They thought your independence meant you could easily move on from disappointment. They assumed that because you knew how to keep functioning, you were untouched by the moments when they withdrew. But recently, they began looking back differently. They started remembering details they had ignored before. The slight change in your tone when something hurt you. The way you became quieter instead of demanding explanations. The moments when you gave them space even though part of you probably wanted them to step closer. The patience you showed when they were confused. The times you could have created conflict but chose understanding instead. And suddenly, a painful thought entered their mind. What if your calmness was never proof that you did not care? What if it was proof that you cared enough not to force them? That possibility changed something. It made them revisit old moments with new eyes. The conversations they once considered small began carrying different meaning. Your pauses became meaningful. Your kindness became harder to dismiss. Your restraint began looking less like emotional distance and more like dignity. And when they understood that, they also realized something about themselves. They had been waiting for certainty before giving you honesty. But certainty does not always come first. Sometimes honesty is what creates it. Your soulmate began to see that they had wanted proof before offering vulnerability. They wanted to know exactly how you felt before risking their own heart. They wanted guarantees before making themselves visible. They wanted reassurance without admitting they needed reassurance. And yet, love rarely works that way. Real connection asks people to speak before they know how the story ends. That truth has been confronting them. There are nights when they mentally practice what they would say if you were sitting in front of them. They imagine beginning confidently, but every version eventually becomes emotional. They picture looking at you and trying to explain why they waited so long. They imagine you listening quietly. They imagine whether you would believe them. And then comes the sentence. I never thought I'd have to tell you this. They stop there even in their imagination. Because the next part changes everything. What they need to tell you is connected to a choice they made when they were afraid. Not necessarily a dramatic choice. Not something designed to hurt you. But a choice that quietly redirected the connection between you. At one point, your soulmate convinced themselves that stepping away emotionally was the responsible thing to do. They believed they were protecting something. Maybe they thought they were protecting you from uncertainty. Maybe they thought they were protecting themselves from rejection. Maybe they believed circumstances were too complicated. Maybe they listened to advice from people who could only see the outside of the situation. Whatever the reason, they decided that restraint was wisdom. For a while, they felt strong because of it. They told themselves they had made the mature decision. But then life continued. Days passed. New conversations happened. Other people came and went. Responsibilities grew. Distractions multiplied. Yet underneath all of it, there remained one unfinished emotional sentence. You. And unfinished sentences have a way of returning. Your soulmate began noticing how often they compared emotional experiences to what they felt with you. Not intentionally. Not even consciously at first. They would be around someone and think, "This is nice," but then a quieter thought would appear, "It is not the same." They would hear someone laugh and remember yours. They would have a meaningful conversation and wonder what you would have said. They would experience a good moment and unexpectedly imagine telling you about it. At first, they resisted these comparisons. Then they became curious about them. Finally, they became unable to ignore them. Because the pattern was too consistent. You were not simply a memory. You had become a reference point. That frightened them more than they expected. Because a reference point means something has left a lasting mark. And this is where another truth begins to emerge. Your soulmate may have appeared emotionally composed, but internally they have been questioning whether they misjudged the significance of your connection. They once believed feelings could be organized neatly. This person belongs in the past. This person belongs in the present. This feeling should disappear. This situation should be forgotten. But the heart does not always obey categories. Some connections become quiet without becoming meaningless. Some people leave the room but remain in the story. Some emotions stop demanding attention only because they have moved deeper. And your soulmate is beginning to understand that what they buried did not disappear. It changed form. It became memory. It became longing. It became curiosity. It became regret. And then, slowly, it became courage. That courage is still fragile, but it is growing. Recently, there has been a moment that pushed them closer to speaking. Something happened that made them think about how quickly circumstances can change. Perhaps they witnessed someone else lose an opportunity because they waited too long. Perhaps they heard a story about two people who cared deeply but never spoke honestly. Perhaps someone unexpectedly asked them a question about you. Perhaps a quiet moment simply became too honest to escape. Whatever the exact trigger, one thought landed with unusual force. What if I never tell them? Not, what if they reject me? Not, what if this becomes complicated? but something more permanent. What if I never tell them? That question stayed. It followed them. It appeared when they tried to sleep. It returned in the morning. And for the first time, the fear of remaining silent became stronger than the fear of speaking. That is the shift you could not see. It is easy to assume that nothing is changing when there is no visible movement. But some of the most important changes happen privately before they ever become actions. Your soulmate is standing in that private threshold now. One side is familiar. Silence. Control. Distance. The ability to pretend nothing needs to be said. The other side is uncertain. Honesty. Vulnerability. Possibility. The risk of discovering what is still alive between you. For a long time, they chose the familiar side. Now they keep looking toward the other. And there is another reason. They have started wondering whether you already know. Not the details. Not the full story. But the feeling. They wonder whether you sensed their hesitation was never simple indifference. They wonder whether you noticed the contradiction between their words and their behavior. They wonder whether you felt the emotional current even during the periods when neither of you named it. And sometimes, that thought embarrasses them. Because if you understood more than they admitted, then perhaps their attempts to hide were never as successful as they believed. There were moments when they almost revealed themselves. A message typed and deleted. A conversation extended longer than necessary. A question asked indirectly. A sudden change in tone. A moment of unusual honesty quickly covered with humor. A goodbye that carried more weight than the situation seemed to deserve. Your soulmate remembers those moments. They remember them because they were standing at the edge of confession. But each time, they stepped back. What you may not know is why. They were not only afraid of your answer. They were afraid of what their own honesty would require afterward. Because once a person admits, "You matter to me more than I have shown," they can no longer hide behind uncertainty. Honesty creates responsibility. If they told you they missed you, they would have to explain why they stayed away. If they told you they cared, they would have to explain why they acted as though they did not. If they told you they wanted another chance to understand the connection, they would have to acknowledge the choices that created distance. And that is difficult. Not because they are incapable of caring, but because caring deeply often exposes the places where pride once ruled. Your soulmate is beginning to see those places clearly. They recognize moments when they expected you to read their mind. They recognize times when they wanted you to fight for the connection while they remained guarded. They recognize how unfair it can be to desire closeness while refusing vulnerability. And this realization has humbled them. There is something else you need to hear. They are not preparing to tell you that everything was a lie. They are preparing to tell you that much of what you saw was incomplete. The distance was real. The confusion was real. The hesitation was real. But so were the feelings underneath it. And now those feelings are demanding a language. That is why the sentence has become unavoidable. I never thought I'd have to tell you this. They never thought they would have to say it because they assumed time would solve the problem for them. They assumed one of you would move on completely. They assumed life would make the decision. They assumed the connection would become irrelevant. Instead, time revealed what distraction had hidden. And that revelation surprised them. The longer they lived without clarity, the more clearly they understood your importance. Yet there is still something they have not admitted even to themselves fully. This part is deeper. Your soulmate is not only afraid that they may lose the possibility of you. They are afraid that they already changed you. They wonder whether their silence taught you to stop expecting honesty from them. They wonder whether their distance trained your heart to become more guarded. They wonder whether you still see them the way you once did. And beneath those questions is a fear they rarely acknowledge. What if they finally become ready at the exact moment you no longer need them to be? That thought is difficult for them. Because it means timing matters. And suddenly, the luxury of endless hesitation disappears. This is why the emotional pressure has been increasing. They may seem normal outwardly. They may continue with routine. They may laugh with others. They may complete responsibilities. But inside, the conversation is getting louder. They are beginning to understand that waiting can also be a decision. Silence can also communicate something. Distance can also shape the future. And if they do nothing, they may one day have to live with the knowledge that the ending was not chosen by fate. It was chosen by fear. That possibility has awakened them. Yet heaven would have you understand something equally important. You are not being asked to chase. You are not being asked to prove your worth. You are not being asked to abandon your peace while another person discovers their courage. The transformation happening in them belongs to them. Your role is not to force the revelation. Your role is to remain grounded enough to recognize truth if it arrives. Because there is a difference between a beautiful confession and a meaningful change. Words can open the door. But actions determine what enters. And your soulmate knows this more than they used to. That is another reason they have delayed. They do not want to approach you with empty emotion. They know that saying, "I miss you," is easy compared to explaining what happens next. They know that expressing regret is easier than demonstrating growth. They know that telling you the truth will require them to become more consistent than they have been. And lately, they have been asking themselves whether they are ready to do that. Their answer is changing. It used to be, "I don't know." Now it is becoming, "I have to try." That is not certainty. But it is movement. And sometimes movement begins with one sentence. There is a conversation coming into focus inside them. In that imagined conversation, they do not speak perfectly. They stumble. They pause. They struggle to find words that can carry months, perhaps years, of complicated emotion. They want you to understand without making excuses. They want to explain without rewriting history. They want to admit where they were afraid. And then they want to tell you the part they have protected most carefully. The part that would reveal why certain moments between you affected them so deeply. There was one moment in particular. You may not even know which one. To you, it may have seemed ordinary. Perhaps you said something kind when they did not deserve kindness. Perhaps you looked at them with understanding when they expected judgment. Perhaps you respected a boundary even though it hurt you. Perhaps you walked away with dignity instead of creating chaos. Whatever the moment was, it stayed with them. They returned to it repeatedly. At first, they remembered what happened. Later, they remembered how it made them feel. And eventually, they realized why it mattered. Because in that moment, they saw something rare in you. They saw love without control. Care without possession. Emotion without manipulation. And that realization frightened them because it made the connection feel more valuable. They knew they could encounter attraction again. They knew they could meet interesting people. They knew they could build new experiences. But something in them began wondering whether the emotional safety they felt with you was easier to lose than to replace. That thought has never fully left. And now another strange thing is happening. Your soulmate has begun remembering not only the good moments, but the moments where the two of you misunderstood each other. Yet instead of using those memories as reasons to stay away, they are beginning to see them as evidence of conversations that never happened. They think, if I had explained what I meant. If I had asked what they were feeling. If I had not assumed. If I had been honest that day. They are seeing how many emotional endings were built on missing information. And once a person sees that, they begin wondering whether the ending was ever truly complete. But there is still one hidden piece. One truth your soulmate believes could change the way you interpret everything. They have been carrying it quietly because they are uncertain whether telling you will bring relief or reopen emotions. This is the part behind the sentence. I never thought I'd have to tell you this. The confession is not simply about love. It is about a decision. A decision they made regarding you that they never explained. They once told themselves they were stepping back because it was best for both of you. But that was only part of the truth. There was another reason. A private reason. Something they heard. Something they believed. Something that influenced how they saw the future between you. And now they are beginning to question whether it was ever true. That realization has shaken them. Because if the thing they believed was wrong, then the distance that followed may have been built on a misunderstanding. Imagine carrying that realization. Imagine looking back at months of silence and wondering whether one assumption changed everything. Imagine realizing that the person you tried to forget may never have been the problem at all. That is where your soulmate is emotionally. They are retracing the story. They are asking who said what. What did they assume? What did they actually know? What did they never verify? And slowly, one uncomfortable possibility is becoming impossible to ignore. They may have protected themselves from something that was never going to happen. This is why the urgency feels stronger now. Not panic. Not fear. Urgency born from clarity. They are beginning to understand that truth delayed can become regret. There is a specific detail connected to that old misunderstanding that they have never shared with you. And if they finally tell you, you may immediately understand why they behaved so differently after a certain point. You may remember a shift, a change in energy, a period when they suddenly became more distant. Perhaps you wondered what happened. Perhaps you blamed yourself. Perhaps you assumed their feelings had disappeared. But your soulmate now knows that the real reason was far more complicated. And the strangest part is this. The thing that caused them to step back was connected to something they thought you wanted. They believed they were respecting your choice. They believed they were getting out of your way. They believed that if they cared about you, they should not interfere. But recently, they discovered something that made them wonder whether they misunderstood you completely. And now the question haunting them is no longer, should I tell them how I feel? The question has become, how do I explain that I may have walked away because I believed something that was never true? That is the conversation approaching. And there is one more layer you need to know before it arrives. Someone else may know part of the story. Not necessarily someone malicious. Not necessarily someone who intentionally created confusion. But another person may have said something, interpreted something, or passed along information that your soulmate accepted too quickly. At the time, it seemed believable. It fit their fears. And fear is very good at recognizing evidence that confirms what it already expects. So they did not question it enough. But recently, something contradicted that old story. A comment. A memory. A piece of information. Something small at first. Yet once they noticed it, the entire picture began shifting. Your soulmate started thinking, wait, if this is true, then what I believed before cannot be completely right. And then they began remembering you. Your behavior. Your words. Your expressions. Things you said that once seemed confusing suddenly made more sense under this new possibility. They started connecting moments they had kept separate. And the more they connected, the more uneasy they became. Because a new story was forming. One in which you had cared more than they realized. One in which they had withdrawn too early. One in which the opportunity they thought was closed may never have been closed at all. That possibility has brought hope. But also regret. Because hope says, maybe there is still something here. Regret says, why did it take me so long to see it? Your soulmate is standing between those emotions. They do not know what your response will be. They do not know whether you will be angry, relieved, indifferent, or quietly emotional. They do not know whether you still want the conversation they once avoided. But they are beginning to understand that your response is not the only thing that matters. They need to tell the truth because it is true. That is growth. Not speaking only when success is guaranteed. But speaking because another person deserves clarity. And you deserve clarity. You deserve to know that not every silence means lack of feeling. You deserve to know that someone else's fear was never a measurement of your worth. You deserve to know that the emotional confusion between you was not entirely created by something you did wrong. And you deserve the freedom to decide what the truth means for your future once you actually have it. That is why this revelation cannot remain hidden forever. Your soulmate senses that too. The words are getting closer to the surface. I never thought I'd have to tell you this. They imagine saying your name after that. They imagine the silence between you. Then comes the sentence they have struggled to form. It begins with an admission. Not an excuse. An admission. I thought I knew what you wanted. And then they would tell you what they believed. They would explain why they stepped back. They would tell you who or what influenced that belief. They would tell you how long they carried it. And then, finally, they would reveal what they recently discovered that made them question everything. But there is one part of that discovery they have not yet decided how to tell you. Because it involves a moment from your past that they interpreted completely differently than you intended. A moment you may remember clearly. A moment they have replayed again and again. And now they realize the meaning they gave it may have been wrong. Very wrong. My child, this is where the story becomes more delicate, because once that moment is revealed, you may understand why your soulmate disappeared emotionally when they did, why they waited so long, and why they are suddenly considering coming back with a truth they never expected to speak. Because the moment they misunderstood was not random. It happened shortly before everything changed. And the person who helped shape their interpretation has recently said something that contradicts the entire story. Your soulmate heard it. They froze. They asked one question. Then another. And what they learned made them realize they may have walked away from you for a reason that never existed. Now they are holding one final piece of information. One detail. One sentence they were told. And if they bring it to you, it may finally reveal what was happening behind the silence all along. But the most surprising part is not who said it. It is what your soulmate discovered that person had misunderstood about you from the very beginning.